The concept of loyalty permeates our existence. From relationships to business partnerships, political allegiances to family bonds. We're taught from childhood that loyalty is one of the highest virtues, something to aspire to, something that defines our character. But what if this fundamental belief is built on a dangerous misconception? What if loyalty, as we understand it, is actually a carefully constructed illusion that blinds us to the true nature of human relations? Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century Florentine philosopher whose name has become synonymous with political cunning, exposed a brutal truth that many still refuse to acknowledge. Loyalty is a lie, not just occasionally compromised or challenging to maintain, but fundamentally, inherently a deception we tell ourselves and others. This isn't just historical speculation. Look around you. The business partner who stays only as long as profits flow. The politician who abandons principles the moment polls shift. The friend who disappears when your social capital diminishes. Even family ties strain and break under sufficient pressure. The evidence surrounds us, yet we cling desperately to the myth of loyalty because the alternative forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about human nature. Machiavelli's insights weren't just applicable to Renaissance politics. They expose the underlying mechanisms of all human interactions. His work doesn't just describe how people behaved in 16th century Florence. It reveals how people behave everywhere, always. And these insights overturn everything you've been taught about loyalty, obligation, and human connection. The Prince and the Power of Self-Interest. To understand Machiavelli's perspective on loyalty, we need to examine his most infamous work, The Prince, written in 1513. Contrary to popular belief, this wasn't just a handbook for tyrants. It was a cold, unflinching analysis of human nature and power dynamics based on Machiavelli's direct observations serving in the Florentine government. Men are by nature fickle, Machiavelli writes. It is easy to persuade them of something, but difficult to keep them persuaded. This observation cuts to the heart of the loyalty myth. People's allegiances don't arise from some innate sense of fidelity, but from calculations of self-interest. Calculations that are constantly being recalibrated as circumstances change. Machiavelli witnessed firsthand how quickly loyalties shifted when fortunes changed. When the Medici family fell from power in Florence, their once devoted supporters quickly pledged allegiance to the new republic. When the Medici returned, these same individuals reversed course again. This wasn't an anomaly. It was the rule. The Prince dismantles the noble facade of political loyalty to expose the machinery beneath. Advisors claimed loyalty while plotting advancement. Allies remained faithful only until better options appeared. Citizens obeyed until the cost became too high. In Machiavelli's analysis, this wasn't moral failure. It was human nature operating exactly as designed. Consider his famous statement, "For a man who wants to make a profession of good in all regards must come to ruin among so many who are not good." This isn't just cynicism. It's a recognition that maintaining unconditional loyalty in a world where others operate from self-interest is a path to destruction. Those who expect unwavering loyalty from others set themselves up to be exploited. Machiavelli's insight goes deeper than politics. The same pattern exists in every human sphere. The employee who pledges loyalty to a company but leaves for a better offer. The spouse who promises fidelity until temptation proves too strong. The friend who swears eternal friendship but disappears when you need costly support. Self-interest doesn't occasionally overcome loyalty. It is the fundamental operating system of human behavior that loyalty merely disguises. the psychological dimensions of imagined loyalty. But if loyalty is so obviously fragile, why do we continue to believe in it? Machiavelli understood this psychological dimension as well. He writes, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see, to few to feel. We see the performances of loyalty, the pledges, the ceremonies, the proclaimed commitments, but few experience the actual calculations happening beneath. We're better at recognizing the signals of loyalty than measuring its substance. This creates a gap between appearance and reality that Machiavelli recognized as essential to social functioning. The myth of loyalty serves powerful psychological and social purposes. It allows us to feel secure in our relationships, despite their inherent uncertainty. It provides a moral framework that enables cooperation despite competing interests. It creates the illusion of predictability in a fundamentally unpredictable social landscape. This explains why we respond so intensely to betrayal. When someone violates our expectation of loyalty, we don't just experience practical harm, we suffer the collapse of a worldview. The intensity of this reaction isn't proportional to the practical damage, but to the psychological threat it poses to our constructed understanding of relationships. Machiavelli observed that effective rulers understood this dynamic. They knew that maintaining the appearance of loyal relationships was often more important than their substance. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, he notes. The successful prince maintains the theater of loyalty while recognizing its limitations. This insight applies far beyond Renaissance politics. Consider modern corporate culture with its emphasis on company loyalty, despite routine layoffs and restructuring. Both employer and employee perform loyalty, while understanding its conditional nature. The performance itself becomes a form of currency, valuable even when both parties recognize its limitations. The calculation of conditional loyalty. Rather than dismissing loyalty entirely, Machiavelli reconceptualizes it as conditional, based on calculations of advantage rather than moral obligation. The friendship which is gained by purchase and not by greatness and nobility of spirit is bought but not secured, and at a pinch is not to be expended in your service. This statement reveals Machiavelli's nuanced view. Loyalty purchased through benefits alone creates a transactional relationship that lasts only as long as the benefits continue. This doesn't mean loyalty can't exist, but its nature is fundamentally different from our idealized concept. Machiavellian loyalty operates on continual assessment of costs and benefits. People remain loyal when the perceived benefits of loyalty exceed the benefits of betrayal, accounting for risks and consequences. This isn't absolute but relative. They don't need a perfect alternative, just one that appears marginally better than their current position. This explains why loyalty often fails precisely when it's most needed. During prosperity, loyalty is easy, the benefits flow freely, and alternatives don't seem markedly better. But in crisis, when loyalty becomes costly and alternatives grow more attractive, the calculation shifts. This is why friends disappear during hardship, allies defect during political challenges, and corporate loyalty evaporates during downturns. The conditional nature of loyalty also explains its asymmetry. Those with power expect greater loyalty than they offer in return. A prince demands absolute loyalty from subjects while maintaining flexibility for himself. Employers expect employee loyalty through difficulties while feeling no reciprocal obligation during downturns. In personal relationships, the partner with more options often expects greater loyalty than they demonstrate. Machiavelli didn't condemn this asymmetry as immoral. He simply recognized it as the natural consequence of power imbalances. The expectation of unconditional loyalty serves the interests of the powerful by binding the less powerful while preserving their own freedom of action. It's a mechanism of control disguised as a moral virtue. Fear, interest, and the basis of reliable relationships. If loyalty isn't the solid foundation we imagine, what actually sustains relationships? Machiavelli offers a striking assessment. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. This statement shocks modern sensibilities, but Machiavelli's point isn't that tyrannical fear is the ideal basis for relationships. Rather, he's acknowledging that reliable relationships must be anchored in something more durable than professed loyalty or emotional connection. Fear, in Machiavelli's framework, doesn't necessarily mean terror or coercion. It encompasses the broader concept of consequences, the understanding that betrayal carries meaningful costs. These might be legal, social, financial, or reputational. The key insight is that relationships stabilize when the cost of betrayal exceeds its benefits. We see this principle operating everywhere. Employment contracts include non-compete clauses, not because they enhance loyalty, but because they increase the cost of defection. Marriage involves not just emotional commitment, but legal and financial entanglements that make separation costly. Political alliances include formal treaties with specific consequences for violation. These structures don't prevent betrayal entirely, but they alter the calculation that underlies conditional loyalty. Machiavelli also recognized that aligned interests create more reliable bonds than professed loyalty. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. When circumstances change, promised loyalty often breaks against the pressure of current interests. But when interests remain aligned, relationships persist even without emotional attachment or moral obligation. This explains why some relationships prove surprisingly durable despite minimal emotional investment, while others collapse despite deep professions of loyalty. Business partnerships between parties with complementary needs can last decades through mutual benefit, while intense friendships dissolve when interests diverge. The appearance of loyalty flows from aligned interests rather than causing them. Navigating a world without absolute loyalty. If we accept Machiavelli's view that loyalty is conditional rather than absolute, how should we navigate relationships? Does this mean abandoning all trust and operating from cynical self-interest? Not necessarily. Machiavelli himself offers guidance. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Discerning the conditions under which others maintain conditional loyalty becomes an essential skill. This means assessing not just their character, but their interests, alternatives, and the consequences they face for betrayal. This approach doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but manages it more effectively than blind faith in absolute loyalty. It allows for strategic trust based on alignment of interests rather than moral expectations. It anticipates potential points of divergence rather than being blindsided by unexpected betrayals. Consider how this applies across different domains. In professional relationships, it means recognizing that employers remain loyal to valuable employees during prosperous times, but will sacrifice them when necessary. Employees similarly adjust their loyalty based on opportunities and treatment. Neither party is morally deficient. They're responding to changing calculations of interest. Effective navigation means anticipating these shifts and positioning accordingly. In personal relationships, it means understanding that even deep emotional bonds are influenced by practical considerations. Friendships that impose significant costs without corresponding benefits eventually strain. Romantic relationships face pressures when interests diverge. This doesn't mean love isn't real, but it does mean that love alone doesn't guarantee loyalty when fundamental interests conflict. In political contexts, it means recognizing that alliances and oppositions form around interests rather than principles. Parties that fiercely oppose each other can become allies when circumstances change. Longtime supporters can become critics when incentives shift. These aren't anomalies, but the normal functioning of political systems. This perspective doesn't require abandoning ethical standards. Machiavelli himself maintained that virtuous behavior is preferable when practical. It is better to be temperate than rash. But it does require recognizing that others may not maintain such standards when interests strongly pull in other directions. The power of anticipated consequences. Machiavelli's perspective ultimately leads to a provocative conclusion. Genuine loyalty doesn't arise from moral character or emotional attachment, but from carefully constructed systems of consequences and aligned interests. Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear, Machiavelli writes. A wise prince should rely on what is under his own control, not on what is under the control of others. In relationships, this means creating conditions where loyalty serves others' interests, rather than relying on their moral commitment or emotional consistency. This explains why some organizations maintain remarkable loyalty despite demanding environments. They create systems where advancement, recognition, and reward clearly align with organizational contribution. The appearance of exceptional loyalty actually reflects exceptional alignment of individual and organizational interests. It also explains why some families maintain stronger bonds than others. Those that create mutual interdependence and clear consequences for betrayal often demonstrate greater loyalty than those relying solely on emotional or moral obligations. The mechanisms may be implicit rather than explicit, but they function in the same way. Even nations exhibit this pattern. Patriotism and national loyalty flourish not just from cultural identity, but from citizens' perception that their interests align with national interests. When this alignment weakens, so does national cohesion, regardless of appeals to loyalty or shared identity. The liberation of Machiavellian clarity. There's something initially depressing about Machiavelli's perspective on loyalty. It strips away comforting illusions and forces us to confront the conditional nature of human relationships. But there's also something profoundly liberating in this clarity. Understanding loyalty as conditional rather than absolute allows us to build more resilient relationships by focusing on aligned interests rather than promises that may not withstand changing circumstances. It helps us avoid the bitter disappointment of betrayal by anticipating the conditions under which loyalty might falter. We can make more realistic assessments of our own loyalty, recognizing that our commitments will be tested when interests diverge. This perspective enables us to design systems and agreements that support desired behavior rather than relying on moral appeals that may prove insufficient. Perhaps most importantly, we can respond more effectively when loyalty fails, seeing it as a predictable consequence of changed circumstances rather than moral failure. This perspective doesn't require abandoning ideals or embracing cynical exploitation. Instead, it introduces a more sophisticated understanding of human motivation that can actually strengthen relationships by placing them on more realistic foundations. Ultimately, Machiavelli's insight isn't that loyalty doesn't exist, but that its nature differs fundamentally from our idealized conception. Real loyalty isn't an absolute moral commitment, but a dynamic equilibrium maintained through aligned interests and meaningful consequences. Understanding this doesn't diminish its value, but allows us to nurture it more effectively. The next time someone pledges undying loyalty in politics, business, friendship, or love, remember Machiavelli's clear-eyed assessment. Look beyond the performance to the underlying calculations. Consider what might change those calculations and prepare accordingly. Not because you expect betrayal, but because you understand the true nature of human connection. What appears as cynicism from one perspective represents wisdom from another. The myth of absolute loyalty comforts us, but leaves us vulnerable. Machiavelli's brutal honesty might disturb us, but ultimately protects us, not just from others' betrayal, but from our own naive expectations. And this brings us to the most profound dimension of Machiavelli's insight. The person most likely to betray you isn't the Machiavellian schemer, but the idealist who sincerely believes in absolute loyalty until suddenly, inevitably, they don't. The person who recognizes loyalty's conditional nature can often maintain it more effectively than one who denies that reality until it overwhelms them. In a world where loyalty is conditional, the true difference isn't between the loyal and disloyal, but between those who understand the mechanism of loyalty and those who don't. Understanding doesn't guarantee that relationships will last, but it dramatically improves your ability to navigate their complex, ever-shifting reality. But there's another dimension to Machiavelli's perspective on loyalty that remains even more provocative, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about human connection. This dimension explains why certain individuals and organizations command extraordinary loyalty that seems to defy rational calculation. The answer isn't that Machiavelli was wrong about loyalty's conditional nature, but that he understood a deeper truth about human psychology that most still fail to grasp.